Hello, all you people out there in TV land. My name, CB Studios, also known as Kurt, and it's Friday the 13th, the only Friday the 13th that we get this year in 2025, so we're really going to have to make it a good one, I guess. I had big plans to do a Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives mask build and costume tutorial for this most auspicious day, and guess what I did this month? Not that. I have a bunch of stuff ordered and a bunch of stuff started, but I don't have it done. So that will be later on this year. We'll do a full sculpt and mold of the under mask and whole costume tutorials. So keep an eye out for that. What I did do this year in the lead up to Friday the 13th is I saw a trailer. I saw a trailer for a horror movie sequel that I really loved the original. And that movie is The Black Phone 2. I loved the first Black Phone. I've seen it several times, saw it in the cinemas. It had a really, really cool 1970s vibe. That was awesome, and I really loved it as a standalone movie. 1 week ago, they dropped the trailer for the Black Phone 2, and I was like, yeah, it's just sort of spoilers, but like, he's no longer at the end of that movie, and yeah. And it looks like for the sequel, they're going to be doing sort of an Nightmare on Elm Street vibe. I don't know how they're going to do it, but it looks very supernatural and very spooky. But the most spooky thing about that movie, at least in my opinion, one of the coolest aspects of the Grabber character, Ethan Hawke, and his main antagonist, I guess, so we don't get demonetized, is this. The Grabber mask. Now, originally, when I saw the movie, I thought it was the coolest looking mask that I'd seen in a long time, and I still very much think that. But watching the trailer for Part 2, I absolutely had to have one. So, I built it. I 3D printed this and finished it up and built this whole thing in a week, basically. I started last Tuesday, and it's now currently Thursday. Now, this is not just a one-piece mask. No. The smiling face, and we also have the mouthless version. Now this is a really cool 3D print file, and I'm going to show you how I took that 3D print file, ran it through my very, very cheap, I think $200 10 years ago, Aldi 3D printer, how I 3D printed, sanded, filled, and painted, rigged up my magnets, and even put on the leather straps to make my very own Grabber mask. And I gotta say, this was actually a pretty straightforward and very fun project. If you've got a 3D printer, then anybody can take a stab at it. Couple of things about these 3D prints. I actually got the files for this off Cult 3D, and it's a company called Black Gorilla Armory. And I had several criteria when I went to go and buy my 3D print files, because I did pay for them. It's not the most screen accurate of 3D files, but that's not a problem, because I made mine a little bit of my own. It's got a little bit more contrast than what the movie masks do. And part of my decision was it was also one of the first ones that showed up. I'm really, really happy with these files, and if you want to do exactly what I did, you can't go wrong with the Black Gorilla Armory files. These were printed at 100% scale as well, so I didn't have to tweak any of the scaling, and they happen to fit really well on the bed of my 3D printer. So, come along, let's jump into the video, and I'll show you how we made this work. We're going to start with some time-lapse. Just a small amount of voiceover as we start looking at the time-lapse. This is just for the forehead of the mask, and I'm just basically putting this in here because it's 2.5, nearly 3 full days of 3D printing for this. It's just really hypnotic to watch. Alrighty, so we've already gotten underway with doing this 3D print. Okay, so that's the start of this mask. It's going to be the 3D print that's going to form the mask, and like these are two of the bits that we're looking at already. So we got the top half of the mask, which you see throughout the course of the film. Awesome, really, really nice print. Took ages to do. This top half of the print in fine quality. I don't remember exactly what the specs are for the layer height on that, but in fine detail quality. And 95% infill, so very high infill. Took a grand total of 63 hours to print. That's fucking awful. I hated that. It was very, very stressful. But it's come out really, really nice and clean. It's got some great detail. I'm super happy with the finish. 63 hours for the top half, and we have the frowny face section printed for the lower half. This took about 26 hours, I think, to print. Again, in that fine detail and in 95% infill. And if we can get them to line up just a little bit, we've got our whole mask there. That's great. Currently, on the 3D printer, just to my right here, we have the smiling face, lower part of the face, and that's at 93%. Now, we are going to need to do some leather straps, so there'll be a little thing on doing the leather straps in just a moment. And we're going to have to attach those straps to this mask. There are two sets of straps. So there's straps on the top half, which are mounted up sort of here. And then there's straps on the lower half, which are mounted further down. For attaching the straps, I'm going to use what's known as Chicago screws, and I'll show you how they go in a little bit. That will mean that my straps are going to be removable. I'm only going to only ever display one jaw at the same time. So instead of doing like 5 straps, I will do 2, at least for this point in time. Or instead of doing shitloads of straps, I will just do the 2. So I'll do straps for the top and straps that I can swap for the bottom. That will probably change over time. I only ordered enough to do like 1 set, so I don't fucking care. I'll get to it later on. That's fine. That's another day's problem. So, first things first, now that I've got this printed and I have removed most of the support material from the inside, which I've still got to sand a little bit on the inside there. I'm going to get to just clearing off some of the last little bits of details. I'm going to coat this in a UV resin and I'm going to sand the outside of it. But that UV resin is going to help fill in some of these layer lines as we do still have some texture. That'll also give me just a really nice sandable surface to work with before I go and base coat it with my cream colored paint. Before I do that, I am going to use a soldering iron and I'm going to melt in the holes to mount my Chicago screws through the sides. So, let's get to it. Let's get some building. All right, so these are my 2 mask pieces that I've got done at the moment while the mouthpiece is still printing over there, or the smiling one. You can see we've got a lot of really nice detail. This edge was oriented, so it printed like this. It printed flat, and then support material came up from the inside. And then this one was printed with these 2 edges being flat, and then support material coming up from the inside as well. Now, with regards to support material is a sacrificial print. I'm using tree supports because they use far less support material. But as your 3D print goes up, it can't print in mid-air. It's not going to be able to print just plastic onto nothingness. And so your slicer software can generate your supports that also print at the same time. They go up and connect with areas on your print. So they basically build up. And that means that when it gets time to print into nothingness, they've got something to print onto. This is all of the support material from the lower jaw as well as the top of the face. And really that's only like maybe 50 grams worth of material. It's not very much, but it allows you to get a much nicer print. Now on the subject of print lines, you can see, if we can get it just in the light, you can see a lot of little horizontal lines. This has been printed with an awful lot of texture and printed at a really fine resolution, so these layer lines are much smaller, but I still want to get rid of them before I go through and paint them. I want to still keep some texture on this. So what I'm going to use for that is 3D printer resin. Now this is an Anycubic standard resin, and this is a UV cure resin. So what I'm going to do is just brush on a really thin layer and go and sit these out in the sun. And then once it's dried in that UV exposure, I'm going to do another layer. And that should be enough to really get a good plasticky sort of finish on this that I can then sand back. It'll still keep all of this detail because it's very thin, it's very watery, but will help fill in those layer lines. That's going to be my way forward with this because I want to maintain a lot of this existing detail. I think that's going to be the best way to go. So yeah, you can see the layer lines on that one there. All right, so this is the grabber mask now that it's been hit with some UV resin. Which you can see has filled in, we got some schmutz. It's filled in a lot of those layer lines. It's given a much nicer finish. Now I haven't sanded this really nice and perfectly smooth because I want it to still have some texture and inconsistencies and details and all that sort of crap through it. This is really gonna pick up nicely when I go through and paint it. And the entire surface before I sanded it was actually washed with some isopropyl alcohol, just to try and knock down some of the stickiness. It's still a little sticky in some of the areas, but I'll go through with a soft bristle brush and do that. But it's smoothed out a lot of these layer lines. You can see where the white of the resin has actually sunken into those layer lines. This surface is actually really nice and smooth. So it's gonna look really, really good. Look at that, that's gonna look awesome. What I'm gonna do is wait for the smiling jaw to be finished, which is still a couple of minutes off. It's about half an hour before that one's finished. We're at 97%. I'm gonna do the same process for the lower jaw, and I'm gonna smash some paint on these, and we're going to see how we go. I'm also going to print some little magnet tabs that I've 3D modeled so that these will join with magnets through there. I've got to run those on the printer too, but I won't bother filling and sanding those as they're going to be hidden for the most part. Yeah, I guess we're going to jump back in once those pieces are printed, and we're going to look at where we're at. All right, so as you can see, we have our 3 pieces, at this point, our 3 pieces of the grabber mask painted, or at least base coated. We're a little shiny, but that's okay. This is all going to get a matte coat to dull everything down once we're finished with this. Now, I have a pretty solid idea on how I want to paint this up, but I also do have some reference pictures as well of just basic sort of weathering areas and that sort of stuff. This is from a user on yourprops.com. That mask is actually a production-made mask, so decent reference for what I'm looking to do. Instead of going and buying specific paints for this, I'm going to use what I've got on hand. This is Sahara Beige by Montana, or Montana Gold. This stuff is interesting spray paint. I got a couple of cans because I'm using it for a Shore Trooper build from Star Wars Rogue One. Like most of my paint ups, I'm going to go fairly simple and easy going with this. It's going to be essentially 3 colors and variations of those 3 colors, which is going to be just a black, and this is just a cheap medium body acrylic. My trusty burnt sienna, which I absolutely fucking love. That's a really nice rusty sort of brown. And we're going to use just a white, titanium white for this one, which I'm going to use to highlight some areas and try and bring a little bit more lightness to the paint up, rather than it being this sort of yellowed look. Also, just going to use these cheap chip brushes. They're like $2 a packet. These are great for these sort of paint ups because they are, as I said, really cheap, but also really good for stippling and getting into texture and details, which this mask has a lot of texture and cracks and crevices that I want to do. I'm going to throw you on some time lapse and let's get started. All right, so that has knocked a lot of the yellow out of this and given it a much more matte finish, which, as you can see, looks a whole lot nicer. But I'm really happy with how this is looking. The whole process of painting something like this, much like trying to paint a Jason mask or anything like that, any sort of a horror character, something that's, you know, supposed to look old and have texture and aging and all that sort of thing, it's a process of just adding color and subtracting color and adding color and subtracting color and building up those layers to really get the sort of finish that you're looking for. That's the case with this, is just loading it up to get all of the detail and then just trying to knock as much of this out as possible with the white, try and even everything out, try and just make things a little bit more subtle. This is a much more detailed paint job than what's on my reference images. As you can see on my reference images, it's really, really simple. But I quite like the finish that this is going for. Mine's not going to be 100% screen accurate, and I've come to terms with that. That's partially because the files that I went for don't appear to be 100% screen accurate, but that's okay. I'm not super worried about that. I'm just looking for something that you're going to look at it, and see it and go, oh yeah, that's the grabber, that looks great. And actually have a mask that looks like it's got some weight, got some heft, and got some age to it. And I actually really like the sculpt on this, the digital sculpt. Now that we've done the white, I can go through and I just want to dry brush this edge with black, as that looks to be how they've differentiated the seam. And that's just going to make our seam line a little bit more apparent, which I want to be obvious. Alrighty, I'm going to go through and I'm going to do a bunch more detail paint on the head, specifically around the eyes. And we might go and hit it with a clear coat. Alright, so as you can see, we've got everything painted up, and I've started attaching some magnets to these pieces just off screen, and we're going to do the mouthless piece, which is obviously not fully painted yet. We're going to do that just so you guys can see how I've decided to do this. Now, I've done this off camera for several reasons. First of all, is I wasn't sure it was going to work. This is something important to remember whenever you're using 3D print files, is while the files may look amazing, they may be really, really well designed, and in this case they are, they're designed fantastically. This did not have a way to actually attach the pieces together. This didn't have any attachment points for magnets or anything like that, and if you're looking at these top edges, they're pretty thin. It's not like you can drill in there and place a magnet into it. So, what did I do? I designed these little tabs. Now these are some V1s that are pretty chewed up at the moment. But it's basically, I printed a flat piece that's sort of a big D shape, has a socket in there to perfectly accept the magnet. And I used my soldering iron to weld it down onto the inside of the mask, set the magnet into it, and then used a lighter to soften the plastic and heat it to shape. I've had to do a couple of iterations of this, but you can see our little tabs here. See, that's our little D-shaped tab. And you can see how it is soldered up into the top here. So I basically just melted the plastics together. It's not the cleanest. I will go through and sand this up a little bit before I'm totally finished. But that's how I decided to attach those two pieces of the mask. I have also modeled up this little bridge piece on the inside of the nose, as you can see here, which is again plastic welded into place. You can see it there. And that lines up really well with a magnet just on the inside of the nose pieces on these. Now we've got them on 2, so 2 out of 3, yeah. And then you can see our other magnets are just glued into the side, and these are just glued in with epoxy. So what I'm going to do now, so that you guys can see how it works, is how I glue the magnets into this to have everything line up really nice and perfectly, so that we can just clip into place. And then when we want to, we can clip into place. And they're nice and strong supports. They're not going to fall off or anything like that, but then when you pull them, they pull straight off. Awesome. Let's get to it. Alright, so to begin with, we're going to use some magnets. I have 3 magnets here. There's 2 larger ones, which will go on the side, and 1 smaller one, which will go on the bridge of the nose. We're going to need epoxy. I'm using Selleys 5-minute Araldite. It's a nice quick adhesive on this one here. Something to mix up on, which is just going to be the back of this paint palette. And we're going to use some tape. So, masking tape, we're going to put over the nose joint. And I'm going to get right up into that corner. Yeah. So we're right up into that. And we're going to do 2 small pieces of tape just over our hanging down tabs. Now what this is going to allow us to do is put a lot of glue on our new magnets, but we're not going to end up gluing the jaw piece to the mask. This is really important. I've gone through and worked out the polarity of these magnets. These ones on these tabs are already glued into place. So all we need to do is just pop, and that's going to be the correct way for it to magnet into place. Really important to make sure that your polarity is going to work before you go ahead and glue everything together. You want to make sure that you are not going to have magnets that repel each other. So, because these have all attached here, I know that if I load Araldite onto the back of these and clamp everything together here, I know that when I pull this off and my magnets are stuck to this, it's all going to connect back together. I am going to give this a quick wipe down with some acetone just to get rid of a little bit of that paint on the surface. You'd rather glue to plastic rather than the paint. The final thing to remember before going ahead and mixing up your glue, because you've got more working time, and then 5 minutes it's fully cured, make sure that you've got everything ready. Make sure you've got your tape on there, your magnets are all prepped, everything's organized. This is clean and dry. You want to make sure that your magnets are clean and dry. And we're also going to need our masking tape and our clamps. Make sure you've got everything ready before you go ahead and mix up your glue. You don't want to be fighting the time frame on your glue. We're going to mix up even parts, about that. That looks like a heap. That's going to be excellent. Always put the lid back on our container. Paddle pop stick, and we're going to mix. You want to make sure that this is really, really, really well mixed. We're pretty well mixed there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a great big dollop, make sure not to get it on my mask. I'm going to put a big dollop on 1, big dollop on 2, and then a big dollop on 3. What I'm going to do now is we're going to bring our mask together. Make sure that everything's lined up really nicely. I'm going to start off, and what I have done is I've put my clamp right on that tab. We're going to do a second tab, and still making sure that we've got everything pushed into place so that it's all going to be in the right location. And now finally, I'll take my gloves off for this because it's a little easier for doing it without gloves, is I'm going to get a big piece of tape. I'm going to stick it up under the jaw, under the chin, go right up over the top of the mask, tape it up like that. You want to make sure that everything is really nicely, firmly clamped into place as well. The reason that we're doing tape up over the top is that pulls it this way, so it pulls it this way. It's going to help us get a little bit more contact between the magnet that's up here in the bridge of the nose at the top of the mask and on the bridge of the nose at the bottom of the mask. Now this is going to take about 5 to 10 minutes to set up, but I'm going to leave it for about half an hour before I take any of the clamps or anything off, just to make sure that everything is nice and firm. We should be good to go from there. All right, so every mask needs straps to hold it onto your head. And for the grabber mask, looking at behind the scenes photos, it looks like it's leather strapping, which it is because there's some behind the scenes photos of the masks being made. I've chosen this really nice 20mm wide buffalo leather belt blank. So it's like 120 centimeters. Should be more than enough to do a top and a bottom strap. I'm going to attach my straps with Chicago screws, which I had a bag floating around here somewhere. And I've lost them. Haha. Chicago screws are these. It is a screw head, and instead of it being a nut, it's a little threaded back piece here. I think it was about 13 bucks for the leather belt blank, and it was about 8 or 9 bucks for the Chicago screws. It wasn't much. They're actually pretty cheap. Depending on where you live, leather may be more expensive, hardware may be more expensive, it may be harder to find whatever you need. I got this from Mac Lace, M-A-C-L-A-C-E. I'll drop a thing down in the, you'll see a bit here. They're fairly close to me, they're here in Brisbane, so it was the best place to go to. They also sold me some very nice antique buckles, or antique finish buckles. These are again to fit onto the 20mm strap. So easy done with that. I'm going to attach these with rivets over the leather strap. I'll show you that in a second. But these are going to look really, really nice for what I want. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this blank in half, and that's going to give us our top and bottom straps. I'm then going to estimate my sizing, and then we'll jump back to the camera and you can see what we look like there. Sound good? Sounds good. Let's go. All right, really easy. I've just split my straps up into 4 lengths. We've got these shorter ones that the buckles will be attached to. I think, yep, we're gonna attach the buckles to these ones. And we've got slightly longer ones for the strap ends, or the bitter ends of the straps. I'm gonna age these up a little bit as well, but I'm gonna use this tool, which is an edge beveler. You can see it's got its little camel toe shape there. And you sit it on the edge of your leather on an angle, and you push, and it basically cuts a bevel onto the edge of your leather. We're going to do that on the top and the bottom on each edge. So we've got our straps done there. We're going to have to fold a section over. It's only going to have to be about that. that our buckle's going to sit through. Yeah. But we're also going to have to cut a notch for this tongue to fit through, for the buckle tongue. Yeah, like that. Yeah, makes sense. So, what I have for that is what is known as an oblong punch. So it's a hole punch, but instead of it being a round hole punch or a cylinder hole punch, which I got one floating around here. Yeah, I do. Cylinder hole punch. Yeah. You can get a rotary hole punch, which is like the clicky wheel ones. They're pretty useful as well. But this is specifically used for cutting a slot. So it's got a rounded edge, rounded end, and then sort of connection pieces. So what we're going to do is just punch straight through there. And then once we fold this edge over, we'll have a nice little slot for the belt tongue to fit through. So we're going to need to compensate a little bit of space for our double cap rivets. Now, if you've seen any of my Freddy Krueger glove build videos, you'll know these. I'm just using some antique brass. So I think we're going to use about this much folded over. That looks like it's going to be about right. I'm going to just fold down the leather with a hammer, just that little bit. This will soften. The more you work the leather like this, the more it'll soften. But this will actually help us. It'll relax the leather a little bit. And that gives us our nice little center point, our center mark for where we want to run our oblong punch. And I'm using just a scrap belt piece, a scrap piece of leather underneath. Whenever you're using hole punches and stuff like that, even the rotary punches, the wheel punches, always put some leather underneath or some rubber or something that will stop it from punching through and hitting on a hard surface like a table, and your punches will last a whole lot longer. So, a couple of quick strikes on the back. And our punch goes through. Look at that. That's so nice. Oh, look at that. That's going to look lovely. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my rotary punch, one of these guys. And I've got it on a fairly small hole there. So we're going to go there. You can see that we've got enough space. I'm just going to punch a hole the whole way through. Excellent. Now, we're going to pop some buckles on. So we're going to get our tongue through the middle notch of the buckles there. And while that's sitting like this, we can line up our hole. So you can see there, we can see the whole way through. We're going to take our rivet. We pop our stem through the leather. And through that side of the leather. Yeah, you can see the end popping through there. Cool. We're going to sit this over the edge. Couple of big strikes with a hammer. And that is never going to come apart. I am going to have to do my other ends of the straps. And this is going to be pretty straightforward. I'm just going to use the exact same techniques that I've used for the rest of them. I'm going to cut a nice little bullet end on these. I'm actually going to double check my reference and make sure that it is a bullet end. I think it is. Basically, it's just going to be an end that sort of like hint, so that it makes a pointy end. I'm then going to mark out my holes on this. I'm going to do 10 mil spacing on this. For the holes that I punch in this, it's just going to allow a little bit more of a finer degree of fitment. I'm going to go off camera, do these, and we'll cut back to the main portion of the build. Thanks for coming on Leathertown. All right, so now that we've got our top of the mask done, we have our 3 mouthpieces done. All we've got to do is attach the straps. So these are how the straps have finished up. Really, really nice. So what I've done is I've held the straps up against my head while I was wearing the mask, and I have just used an awl, a pointy bit, just to make a line, very faint line, where this is going to sit. And so that is going to be where our straps attach. So what I'm going to do from now is we'll start with the top strap first, and I'll knock the camera, that's really important. Start with the top strap first, line up my scrape line, which is there, line that up with the edge of the mask, and I'm going to use, well, Sharpie's probably not going to reach, so I'll just use the awl as well, just to mark where my hole's going to be. Just pressing into the leather, which leaves a nice little indent, as you can see there. So I can now cut off the excess strap for the leather, because I'm not going to need this. And I'm going to punch a hole through that will fit the shank this bit of my Chicago screws. All that we need to do with this is just pop and press. Crunch through. I like to swivel it a little bit just to make sure that we have got complete punch through. And now straight in. Beautiful. All right, so I will just jump in and say really quickly that when I put my Chicago screws through, because of the length of them and also the thickness of this print, I really don't have enough space for the screw to really bite in. So what I've done on this side, you may see a big sort of circular divot here. What I did was I actually heated up the plastic just with a little butane torch. And because this is a thermoplastic, this works really well, making sure not to set things on fire. But I then sat the mask down and pushed the end of a screwdriver into it to try and just flatten out some of that space there. Now, it doesn't need to be too much, but you do want it to get relatively flat. This is the sort of thing when you're working with real-world hardware and say a 3D print, something like that. I didn't take this into account when I ordered my pieces. Now, I have distorted the hole just a little bit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just through with a drill bit. Beautiful. And so now, when I pop my Chicago screw through my leather, if we go through like that and we pop through here, you can see we're very, very close to the surface, which is excellent. And that means when I start turning our screw, it connects to the screw threads in the other side and allows for a really nice, solid attachment point. Just thought I'd jump in and say that when you're working with 3D prints, not everything will work every time. Sometimes you do have to improvise to try and get the results that you're looking for. And there we go. Abracadabra. That's how I turned a bunch of 3D printer filament into the grabber's mask from the Black Phone and the upcoming Black Phone 2. Now, I know that you used to be able to get the Trick or Treat Studios versions of these. However, they are now out of production, which is a shame. They're much, much harder to find. But if you've got a 3D printer and a little bit of time, you can make one of these yourself with minimal effort. Now, there are still a few things that I want to do with these masks. Specifically is doing straps for the mouthless and the smiley. I have the leather on order for those. I just really wanted to get this video out before Friday the 13th. If you want to pick up this exact file, then Black Gorilla Armory on Cult 3D is where I bought mine. You can go and buy it. I hope you enjoyed watching the video. If you did, drop down into the comments below and tell me what you would do differently if you were making your own, and tell me which mouthpiece for this mask is your favorite. Personally, I really like the frowny face. It's really unsettlingly evil. Thanks very much for watching, guys, and until next time, maybe don't answer that ringing black phone. Took me longer to blow up these balloons than they're going to be seen in this video at all. That's a travesty.